Hey guys, Andrei from CFX Films here, and this is a different type of video today. I'm hoping to do more of these in the future. I'm not quite sure exactly how this one's going to turn out, but I'm really excited for it because I have a special guest here, Eric from EteeskiTutorials. You guys may know him, another really awesome YouTuber who does game development, tutorials, and is really passionate about the industry. And it's really awesome. And I'm super excited to get to be talking to him today. And we're going to be doing a interview video where we're just going to be talking about the industry, talking about specific topics that we are passionate about and that we know they are thoughts that a lot of game developers have that are new to the industry. So we'll be hoping to answer those questions today and hopefully teaching you guys and educating you about different topics in the industry so you can better prepare yourself.
All right, hey everyone. Yep, like Andrei said, my name is Eric. I'm from the YouTube channel EteeskiTutorials. Yep, really passionate about making video games, and we're just going to be talking about video games and the industry and things that we've just learned over the years, and just talking about video game development. So yeah, really excited to be here, and I think this is going to be an interesting discussion video thing, whatever this is.
So we have a list of questions here, and Eric has the first one, so he's going to say what that is, and we're going to basically go right off that and get started immediately.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the fact that kind of something that I thought differently when I first got started making video games, and the point when I got to when I decided that I wanted to try to make this a career. When I first made that decision, my first instinct was to scour the internet for articles and videos, and basically just kept on Google searching things like how to become a video game developer. Do you need to go to school? Do you I don't know. I was just trying to figure out how do you become a video game developer, and that was such a weird question to me. But as I've figured out over the years, there really is no one way to become a video game developer. I mean, for the most part, there's not even any set path or something. It's very different from any other career. Like if you want to become a teacher or a firefighter or a doctor, there are very clear paths for going into those careers. But making video games is the complete opposite, where I guess there's some paths, like you could go to a video game development school like DigiPen or something like that. You can go to any other school and learn computer science or computer graphics and artwork, or you can just teach yourself how to make video games. And in the end, I mean, there's really no clear exact path, and there's also no clear exact end goal for making video games. I mean, it's a lot broader than I originally thought. For making video games, there's nobody's gonna walk up to you and hand you a diploma and go, "You are a video game developer now." It's you just make video games and you figure out what to do with it. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Andrei?
Yeah, I came from a similar place where when I first started, I think it started back. I was challenged by my cousin. I think when he said. When I was first getting into game development, I wasn't quite sure about it either. And he said that it's impossible to make a game by yourself or a big game by yourself. And I was like, challenge accepted. So I tried really hard. I started using Carnegie Mellon's Alice, and that's when I really tried to see, can you make a game by yourself? And as much as I wanted it to be a black or white answer, so just a yes or a no, it didn't end up that way. The question started changing. It changed from can you make a game by yourself to, what kind of game can you make by yourself? Or could you make that same game even better if you had more people? Or what are the benefits and what are the disadvantages? There's so many different elements that kept piling on top. So the more I made games, the more questions popped in my head, and the less that question became a question that was relevant. It just started becoming irrelevant and thinking that's not the right mindset that you need to have.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, just the world of making video games is just so broad. You can't narrow it down to just one single question or one single path that you take to making video games. Yeah, there's just yeah, you can make big games, small games. You can spend a lot of time on, you can spend 3 years on one game, or you can make 20 games a year or something like that. You can sell your games, or you can just put them out there for free. Yeah, yeah, that's something that I didn't realize at the very beginning is that it's just so broad, the world of making video games, so for me, like it was kind of dumb, like looking back, like me researching how do you make video games or how do you become a video game developer, because there is no one answer. I mean, that's kind of something you just kind of figure out for yourself as you go along.
Yeah, that's definitely true, and and I think that's something that's never really going to end because the more you make games, the more you're going to learn about the industry itself. And as the industry is changing so fast, you'll, I think by the end of it, it's a journey. Like life's not about, the destination. It's the journey to get there. And it's funny, since we're talking about video games, I can use the game Journey as an example.
Hmm.
So, in Journey, you're walking to that mountain, and the mountain is the goal, or that peak in the distance. You don't know what it is, but as you get there, it's this big emotional journey, and I think that is really how game development is. And I think basically everything that we've set up to this point, that sort of sums it up in that little bit.
Yeah, it is a
So
big emotional journey, that's for sure.
yeah,
You wouldn't think
I,
that's
I just love how we're using game development references, like game references, to talk about
yeah,
games. Oh, this is going to be a good talk.
yeah. Yeah, that is crazy. Like that's another thing I didn't realize when I first got started is that I didn't realize how like emotional it would sometimes get like with making video games. Like I eventually like after making a couple of video games, I realized that I always get really stressed out and crazy and moody and like when I'm about to release a game, like the closer I get to releasing a game, I just get crazier and crazier. And as it turns out, like a lot of indie video game developers, like that's a really common thing.
But that's why it's a love hate relationship with the industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also an interesting point. When I was talking to Genova Chen from that game company, he made a really interesting point. He told me, he said, you can't be a good game designer if you haven't lived or something like that. I think that's what he was saying. It was basically what he meant was you can't be a good game designer without having the experience to understand what creates an emotional experience or what makes an interesting experience to a player if it's an emotional journey, especially because that's what he specializes in or what he's good at. And that's very true that unless you go through certain life experiences or live life and become independent and actually go through what everybody else has to go through, you won't really be able to understand truly how to capture those emotions for the player. Because once you understand that fundamentally, and then you understand the programming elements and the computer elements, that only then is when you actually can begin to incorporate the two and create something, the masterpieces that some developers have. And you see a lot more emotional games out there. There's a really cool game. I forgot what it was called that just came out. Austin Wintory scored it. It takes place in like an apartment or something, and there's this maid that doesn't see outside, but you only hear what's going on outside, and you're just sort of imagining what's going on.
Mm.
I'm probably gonna overlay this video right now with a screenshot of the game once I find it. I'll have to research it after this. Any games that we mention will be referenced. But that game is a really interesting example. It's a very different form of storytelling, but I guarantee the game developer or the game designer has probably gone through some interesting life experiences to actually understand that enough to be able to create such a crafted experience, such a specific experience that he or she, I don't actually know who it was going for in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's like definitely something like I've heard people say this about writing as well. Is that like if you're trying to tell a story, it's going to be a much more powerful story if that story is really coming from yourself, as opposed to if you're telling a story about somebody who saved the world from aliens or zombies or something that you really can't actually relate to. Like it's one thing like if you want to put your character in that setting, but your story doesn't have to be about zombies or aliens. The story should be about something that's coming from you and that you can relate to. Because it's gonna just like come through in your storytelling so much more if you are making a storytelling game. I mean, I guess I don't know. I guess that's one thing that I've kind of realized is that a lot of games you can tell a story without telling a story. Like that's kind of like one thing I'm going through right now with Ant Simulator is trying to figure out um, what the story is, but I also don't want to have any like narration or reading. Like, maybe there's a few words on the screen here and there, but I really don't want like paragraphs like explaining to you what's going on. I'd rather the player just like see this world and, the actions they take through this world tell the story of what this ant is going through. Um, and, it's not necessarily a very complicated story. There's not really very many plot twists or anything very complicated like that. But, it can still be a story of just kind of like a roller coaster of emotions. And sometimes just the gameplay can be what takes the player through that roller coaster of emotions.
And I think another example is sort of what you're saying. A game that did that was Flower. Flower didn't have a
Oh, yeah.
story. Do you know the game Flower? You just play as the flower petal that flows through, and
Yeah, I think I remember
it's like a
that.
music driven game. But it's emotional. It's like a tale of overcoming darkness and seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. But there's no storytelling. There's no dialogue. There's nothing but a petal that floats through and creates color around in the environment.
Yeah.
You have that, and then on the opposite side of the storytelling, you have games like The Walking Dead, where the zombies aren't real and you can't actually have that, but all the emotional substance in there is so powerful and realistic and real and believable.
Yeah.
So just two different ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's one really interesting thing about video games is the number of different types of storytelling that you can have. Like, yeah, stories with no words or, nothing like, forced into the player, like no cutscenes or anything like that. And then you can have stories that are, maybe text adventures or, games where it's a platformer and there's explosions and then between levels there's cutscenes or dialogue or something like that. So yeah. Oh, one other thing I want to go back to a second. I kind of contradicted myself with Ant Simulator about how I said like the story should come from within you, but I kind of realized that with Ant Simulator, I've never been an ant before, so I have no idea what I was
Well,
talking about there.
yeah, I mean, I know what you mean though, and that sort of also falls in the line of like what I was saying with Walking Dead. It's not real, but it's the concept. It's that idea. It really is the concept of what you're trying to capture. It's just a way to tell that story. But I think what you were saying was true. I mean, I don't think you're necessarily contradicting yourself because, like, I understand what you're saying. I think the people watching this understand what you're saying too. It's that it doesn't have to come through within, but it's the way you present that. It doesn't exactly have to be so literal. It doesn't have to be something that people can grasp or understand immediately.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a metaphor.
Yeah, and that's a lot of video game stories that I've seen is that a lot of times the story can be told, but then like if you were to ask that player like, "Oh, what was that story about?" They'd be like, "Oh, I don't know. That was just a interesting video game." Like, maybe the story's like inside their head and they go like, "Oh, that was really cool," but I don't know how to put what happened into words.
Yeah, get to the end of the game. What was the story? I loved it, but I don't even know what just
Yeah.
happened. There's
Kind of sounds like Flower, or was it Flower? Yeah, that
flower.
might have been like
Yeah,
kind of
you have
like
no
that.
idea.
Or
You have no
Journey,
idea
that
what the
also
end.
like was pretty abstract.
Yeah, the only thing about Journey is that it's multiplayer. That there's the seamless blend where you can come across another wanderer in the middle of the desert,
Oh, that's
and
pretty cool.
that was pretty incredible the first time I experienced that. It's yeah. Well, I think that's I think we've covered our thoughts on that. I think we should let's move on to the next question. There,
Yeah,
I like that question. I think there's a lot of good stuff to be said, but we should keep moving
kind
on.
of just went through like three different topics there.
Oh yeah, that's right. Well, that's the point.
Yeah.
That's what we have to do. Yeah.
Let's see. I guess the next topic is more about the actual development side of a video game and um, more of like the creative side and the design side. And this is something I kind of, I still need to hold myself accountable to like this idea. And sometimes it can be difficult. But the idea is that it's best to start small and then build on top of that when you're building a video game. I know Extra Credits did a really excellent video on this where they talked about, was it minimum viable products? Um, and what they basically talked about was that um, it's really good to just create a prototype of your game first with a minimum number of features and then build on top of that because definitely something I've learned over the years is that everybody talks about game design documents and designing your game before you get started, and a lot of people think that you need an exact blueprint of your entire video game before you even get started on making it. And I think it's better to have ideas before you get started as opposed to a blueprint or a design document before you get started. I think most of my design documents are just ideas that I jot down, and half the time I just throw them away after that because the video game changes so much as you make it. And, I think there's a lot to becoming a good designer and designing a good video game, but I don't know, maybe I'm just different, but I most of the time don't figure out those design decisions and the overall design of the video game until I'm making the video game. And that design changes all the time. Like there's so many ideas that I'll have at the beginning of a video game that halfway through development, I'll just be like, that was a stupid idea. Like that does not fit into this video game at all. So that's why I think it's really good to start with something small and build on top of that because you don't know what the game needs until you actually have the game and it's in your hands and you're playing it. Like I think that's definitely the best way to figure out what feels good and what feels right and what's fun and what's not is to, like say like you're making a side scroller or something. First, just make it so you have a player that can run and jump, and that's about it. And then once that feels good, play around with it for a while, and then just look at it and go like, all right, what's something that I could create in the next hour that might be stupid, but it might be really fun? I don't know. I'm going to give them a rocket launcher. I don't know. It could be anything like that. And then just keep building on the game like that. And then that way, you also, no matter what point you get to, you're much more likely to finish your video game because I see a lot of projects where they have these huge ideas and they don't really first stop to figure out if the game's fun in the first place. And they spend so much time creating so much content and they sometimes never even finish their video game. I think I'm just doing a lot of recapping of what that extra credits video said, but
Well, okay. Well, I'm just writing down what you were saying. I think there's a truth in that about not every developer actually designs the game first. I mean, two things I wanted to say was one, you said that not everybody. The first thing you said was like not everybody designs first or understands that. I don't know. You said something about that. What popped in my head was funny because I was thinking. Another point is not everybody understands that a game idea does not mean having a story. A lot of people end up thinking, oh, I have such a great idea, and they spend years working on this design document, and they're like, oh, it's gonna be such a good game. I got all the backstory and got all this, the lore. I have all this stuff. Yeah, it's so great. The alien come here, and this is when they invaded, and then you look into and you're like, but where's the game? I fall into that trap myself a lot, and it just ends up coming down to you're thinking, oh yeah, there's actually no game here because it has to be fun. Yeah, your story probably not even gonna end up the same way you wrote it. So that's why a couple game developers that I'm talking to, they say like if you present a fully finished story and everything to a company, that's not the best decision because you're not going to end up making that anyway. You're going to be changing things along the way. So you're going to end up throwing away a lot of your content. And a lot of people don't understand that you can't just make a game out of a story. That's why so many games have bad stories because the writers. It's not that the writers are bad writers. It's that the writers are limited. They're so limited by what the game actually ends up becoming.
yeah, it's definitely a lot easier to write a story around an engine so that you know what tools you have to write that story. Because, like, if you're writing a book or something like that, or just a short story, you're just writing something down on paper. You have a limited number of tools, like you have your onomatopoeia, or I'm trying to think back to English class. I mean, you have like dialogue that the characters can say. You can have narration.
It has to be in context, though.
Yeah, and all of it, it's there's no technical issues of what's going on. It's just a matter of just write it down on a piece of paper or type it on your computer. But with a video game, a lot of times, like, you have game mechanics, and a lot of times, the level design can tell a story, or can sometimes be out of place if it doesn't match with the story. So yeah, it's probably best to write the story and the video game at the same time, or write the story a little bit later once the game's been developed for a little while, and what the feel of the game is like, what the art of the game looks like, just what kind of game mechanics can be used to tell a story, what parts of the game feel right, like, little bits of written dialogue, kind of like,
Yeah. Like you need a prototype first, you're saying.
yeah.
Sort of like a game I think that sort of does that is Gears of War, where Gears of War has a really solid third person shooter mechanic. Probably some of the one of the best out there. That's why so many games are clones of Gears of
Yeah.
War. But the first game's story isn't very strong, and it sort of feels like the game was developed first and then they added the story, but after they figured out, hey, this is fun, this works, now let's create a story. And then the second game, they started with the story, and then it's like, all right, I like the story, now let's make this game work with it because we already have a solid mechanic that people enjoy. So they got lucky in some sense there too, but I think that follows along with what you're saying about you do need something there first before you can understand, is this fun? Okay, great, check. Now, how can we make the story work around this without actually being over the top, being too generic? And then that's that's where a lot of developers fall into that trap.
Yeah. And like, I think a way that a lot of people end up writing stories is like, it can fit better as like a cutscene or something like that. And cutscenes just don't work as well with indies. I mean, like, some indies can get away with it if you have a really unique animation style, or
If it's 2D,
yeah, or
if it's 2D, it's a lot easier, or it's a lot easier to create something
yeah.
interesting.
Or the hardest part about being an indie is finding good voice actors. Like, a lot of people like ask their friends to do voice acting, and it's cool, but let's face it, nobody's a good voice actor. Uh,
Well, I challenge that.
oh yeah, you've
So
done a
there's
bunch of
some
voice
pretty
acting in your games.
Well, I'm not saying I'm a good voice actor, but my friend is a good voice actor.
yeah.
I mean, he's a professional actor,
Oh,
so he
okay,
kind
that's
of does
cool.
that stuff. But a majority. I know what you mean. A majority of them, it's very hard to find a good one.
Yeah,
You're getting like House of the Dead quality voice acting.
yeah. And I know I've done.
If you know what I mean.
I know I've done.
It's like every rail shooter is required to have awful voice acting.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's one thing.
Name one with good voice acting.
Yeah, I guess sometimes, like, if you could be like ironic and purposefully have bad voice acting, that sometimes
But
works.
then it's fun, yeah. All right, so my biggest misconception. That is a really tough question to answer because I think I never really had a biggest misconception. I think there were just a lot of topics or ideas that I had about what the game industry would be, like the way to becoming, sort of what you were talking about in the beginning, going back to that about what you thought it means to be a game developer or how to get there. I think when I first started, my idea of how long it would take to make a game or what the stages were, I don't think I fully understood that. Or in my mind, I thought, okay, you make it and then you test it. That whole you make it part. In my mind, it was just you make it. That's so many different parts, and I never really thought about the big picture until I was thinking, oh, I want to add 3D models in my game. Wait, I don't have a 3D modeler. What do I do? So eventually I figured it out as I started working with more developers and I started working on other games. But I think there's this point that every game developer hits when it's sort of reality hits them in the face, and you're like, oh, a game is a lot more work than I thought it was. And you can't, and you can say that when you're just starting. You're like, oh, I understand. Yeah, you got to do 3D modeling and everything, and oh, I don't know how to do that. Oh, I'll just ask my friend or something. But there's so many little complications because a lot of times, I don't think you would incorporate the time it takes to actually learn it and troubleshoot and adapt to the new technology and how rapidly things are changing. And even now, I'm familiar. I know that the industry is changing so fast, but I didn't realize how many new types of tools are coming out and how fast developers have to learn and keep up with the industry in order to stay relevant. Otherwise, the criticism is so harsh. And I realized that, critics really hurt the sales of the games. And I didn't, and from talking to some of my friends who have had these, great critic, great feedback, and then one bad critic, it just kills sales. And that's something that I didn't really think about for a while. But I'm understanding that now. But it's scary too. And you think about how fast people can go bankrupt and how fast you can lose basically all your work through that.
Yeah, that's probably a big misconception I had when I first got started was how much happens outside of the actual making the video game itself. Because I know when I first got started, the first thing I did, I was just a kid, and I just was like, I wonder if I could make a video game, and I Google searched, for game engines, and I eventually landed on Game Maker, and I played around with that for a while, and I just strictly did it just for fun. Then eventually I decided um, I think I heard the video game industry makes more money than the movie industry. And when I was like at the end of high school, I was like, I really need to choose a career. I was like, video game development, that's what it's going to be because I'm pretty good at making video games. I've been, just doing that for fun up until now. So I'm just going to do it serious now. And
Yeah.
I think I just thought that everything was all about just making the game itself, and really that's about it. But I think I eventually realized is that there's just tons of things that go on outside of making the video game itself, like, marketing for one, just figuring out how do you get people
Mm.
to find your game, and, just things as small as, what does your thumbnail look like? What's the title of your video game? How are you going to give this game to Let's Players? Or are you going to find a way for Let's Players to find the game themselves? And how are Let's Players even going to react to this game? If people see a Let's Player play this game, are they actually going to turn around and buy this game, or are they just watching that Let's Player for entertainment? I mean, there's the marketing your game, that alone is a gigantic world, and so many things you got to keep track of, and can be infuriating at times because just nothing seems to work. And like maybe eventually you realize like little things that do seem to work and you still don't fully understand it. And then there's the
Yeah.
whole business side of things, like just the legal side, copyright stuff. Just at what point do you actually get serious and make an actual company? Like, at what point do you just keep on doing this as a hobby? Where does your income come from? Do you even need income? And then that like blends in with the marketing side too. And there's just there's just so many things outside of the video game that can just be really tedious that you don't necessarily have to learn. But I think like if you want to, make this at least a part-time job, or at least, a side thing, or, maybe you're crazy like me and I actually want to try to make this a career, you're going to have to do those things and learn how to do those things. And that can be kind of infuriating because you just want to work on the game itself, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of good points. Yeah, I 100% agree with what you're saying about marketing the game. That's definitely something that I'm going through now. I'm trying to figure that out, but that's something I definitely did not think about a while back. I talked about I had a radio interview maybe like a month ago, and I remember when I talked in that, I said that one time I released my game and I was so excited. Long time ago, I released it on my website and I was like, oh, one person downloads it and they like it, they'll share with their friends. And I posted the game and I was like, all right. And I hadn't like $5 or something like that. And I shared it on Facebook with people. And then I waited for the sales to come in and I got a whole zero.
Yep.
I got zero sales, and that really I think was super important to me. That was my turning point when I thought like, I'm making my games free. I just want people to see them. I don't want the money because I'm like, this is not the right mindset to have. and failing there so hard was super important to me, and I think that really changed my perspective on game development in general, my goal about what I really want to get out of the industry.
Yeah, I went through the exact same thing with the Galaxy interface. My first game that I actually tried selling, or it was my first iPhone game and first Unity game. And yeah, I just put it on the iPhone store for just $1. And I thought that, people would just find it. And, I think, in total, I got 60 sales. So I really lost money on that game. Um, and I think the only people who actually found it were people I actually told, like in person, like friends and family and that sort of thing. Yeah, I think that, like, I definitely remember reading about people saying, like, oh, you can't just put a game up on the store and expect people to find it. And I think I was like, all right, I'm going to take that into consideration. I don't think I fully understood what they meant when I read or heard people say that. And yeah, you got to come up with a better plan. And yeah, I think it's a lot better to start with just getting people to play your game at all, as opposed to getting them to pay money to play your game. Because if you can get somebody to play your game for free, then you can start thinking about getting people to pay money to play your games.
Yeah.
Also, putting your game up
Yeah.
on Game Jolts, Woogly, and Congregates, that helps a ton with people being able to find your game.
Yeah, I think it helps more on Game Jolt than the other two.
Yeah, Game Jolt's a really good one.
Yeah.
All right, well, I guess that's pretty much all the topics that we wanted to cover in this video. I mean, there's an infinite number of topics that we can talk about because, well, video games and making video games is an extremely broad thing, and there's so many different aspects to it. But hopefully this video has been like a nice either starting point or at least some nice tips for some people just trying to figure some things out in the beginning and all of that, because yeah, it can be incredibly confusing because there's just so many different things and you have no idea what things to believe, what things are true, what things apply to you, and where you should go from here and all of that kind of stuff. So hopefully this video has just given you a little bit of insight, and hopefully it was helpful.
Yeah, and that's definitely true. Yeah. So thank you everybody for watching this. So we really appreciate it. We hope that you got something out of this and that you learned something, because that's really why we're making these videos. We both do these tutorials, and we both want to teach new developers, tell them and educate you guys about what you're getting yourself into.
Videos that we wish we had when we first got started. And we're still learning. It's not like that's ever going to stop.
Yeah, and that's very true. And that's very true. But you all will get to experience that as well. And with that note, I want to thank all my subscribers for watching this video. I really appreciate you guys taking the time and actually following me and my work. And it really helps me make these videos and release them every week for you guys.
Yeah, I just want to thank my subscribers too. Definitely go over to Andrei's channel and check out some of his content. He's got some really cool video game stuff going on over there. So I guess, yeah, that pretty much wraps up everything. So until my next video, I will see you guys later and keep making games.